Did the Persians succeed in what they always try to succeed in? Let's get the next meeting and let's have a different location, and we'll have a 4 or 5 day gap, and we'll just continue this, and hopefully President Trump one day will go away.
That is the goal. Look, especially because the whole premise for American action now, like, if you ask yourself, like, what's so excuse me, what's so pressing? It has to do with what happened with those protests. The further we get from the protests, the less credible American military action is. So, yeah, the longer the negotiations take, the better it is for the Persians. That's what they want out of this at this point.
What do you mean? But you're not saying that our military action would be contingent upon Scott Bessent crushed their currency. Economic warfare did that, and then they came out. I guess you're saying when the president said, "We'll have your back" or something. Is that the contingent?
Help is on the way was his line.
The military commitment.
Look, he painted himself into a corner. I said this last time I was on your show last week, that the wisdom of saying help is on the way is questionable. But the problem is that once Trump said that, the Iranian people saw that America had their back. Undoubtedly more Iranians were killed in the street by the regime because Trump said that. And that's something that, and now, whether you like it or not, the way things work in the Middle East, saving face and having honor, these are all things that are very important to the politics. And if America in the end does not come to the aid of the Iranian people in the way that people pictured, it will be perceived, again, I'm not saying this is in America's best interest to do it, but it will be perceived as weakness on the part of Donald Trump. So, that's part of the calculation. It's unfortunate that that's part of the calculation, but that's where we are, Steve. I want to be very clear. While in Israel, we are all in favor of this regime that has been trying to destroy us and investing all of its resources to destroy us. We'd love to see it fall. That doesn't mean that everyone is looking forward to a war or even wants strikes on Iran. I don't think, I'm doubtful as to whether military strikes are the way to bring down the regime altogether.
I'm going to get to that in a second. President Trump is pretty adamant at the State of the Union. He wants peace. He wants a deal, but it's got to be a deal that has no possibility of nuclear weapons and something that's enforceable. You've been pretty articulate about, and also Netanyahu and others, that you can't trust these guys. Anything you do is just on a piece of paper. They're going to sign anything they want to get through the Trump years, and then they're in power forever because there'll never be a Democrat that would follow, that would take action here to actually do regime change or eradicate them. Is that the line of thinking, basically, the consensus thinking in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv?
Oh, for sure. The regime's sole goal, their sole definition of success here, I'm not going to call it victory, but their sole definition of success is surviving the Trump administration, because so long as they can sell their oil to the Chinese Communist Party, which they still are doing, so long as they can do that, they still have cash flow. And so long as they survive the Trump presidency, they know that whatever comes next is going to be probably more favorable to them. And then all bets are off. They can continue along their merry way. And, you saw it after the 12-day war. While from an American perspective, that looked like a victory for the United States, for the West, for Israel, whatever you want to say, by destroying the Iranian nuclear facilities. But they interpreted it as victory because the regime was still standing. These guys don't think in terms of election cycles. They think very, very long term, and their goal is to survive the Trump presidency. And I believe, and I laid this out in my most recent column in the Jerusalem Post, we talked about it, Steve, that the Iranian regime's calculation is very straightforward. They believe that they have a greater chance of the regime falling by capitulating to the demands of the Trump administration as originally laid out, which were 4 demands. They were the dismantling the nuclear, they were curtailing the ballistic missiles, stopping the funding of the proxies, and not persecuting and murdering their own people anymore. Those were the 4 things that Marco Rubio laid out. President Trump also referred to them. They believe, the Iranian regime believes, that if they capitulate to the American demands, they stand a stronger chance of the regime falling because of the weakness that it would project to their own people. They fear their own people way more than they fear military strikes by the United States. And they think that they can survive, the regime can survive with lots of damage from U.S. military strikes, especially considering the fact that they're going to unload their missiles at U.S. targets. They've never done that before. You know, after the 12-day war, they did a kind of symbolic retaliation, if you remember, to Qatar, and they didn't kill anybody. Same thing after Soleimani was killed. They warned the Americans in advance and hit some empty buildings. That's not going to be the case this time. And those American assets all over the Middle East, the Iranians are going to be firing in all directions if they fear that the regime is under attack. And if they kill any Americans at all, we know that it will be, Trump is going to want to get out of there real fast. So I think the Iranian regime looks at their options and they say, you know what, going to war we have a better chance of the regime surviving than capitulating to the U.S. demands. So they'll try to delay things as much as possible and give the Americans less and less of a justification politically for attacking. But in the end of the day, they'd prefer those attacks to capitulating to the U.S. demands. That's how I see it. And everything that's happened has only confirmed my thesis.
By the way, I can't believe this. And it only can happen on the War Room. I think you and Trita Parsi.
That Trita Parsi and Pesach Wolicki agree. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
He just said when he left her, he says, hey, look.
Oh, no, I was thinking the same thing, Steve. I heard him say it, and I was like, I cannot believe that I agree with Trita Parsi. Only on War Room.
But you're saying Trita just said, hey, if it comes down to accepting these four, and he was very specific about the ballistic missiles versus giving up the nuclear program, he says, I think they'll take their shot at militarily, because as bad as they can get, at least they figure they might be able to hang on if they capitulate.
Oh, for sure. Listen,
they're finished.
If the goal is regime survival, capitulation to the U.S. demands, look, again, it's very simple. Let's lay out the logic for the War Room, for the posse. The only force that can bring down the Iranian regime is the Iranian people. So any calculation about what is the right move by the Iranian regime is what will or will not empower the Iranian people. Capitulation to the U.S. demands empowers the Iranian people more than U.S. military strikes on any target you want. The Iranian regime is not the Syrian Assad regime. It's not Gaddafi in Libya. It's not Saddam Hussein in Iraq, where you have just one little family that's kind of a mafia family, and Assad gets on a plane and flies to Russia. The Syrian regime is over. It doesn't work that way in Iran. The Iranian regime is much more like the Chinese Communist Party. It's a massive elite that leads the country. There's about 180,000 members of the IRGC. You have their families. You're talking about 500,000 people, a multi-layered bureaucracy. They know that they could survive military attacks and still suppress unrest. And if they just cause a few casualties to the Americans and make it last a little too long, Trump does not want a prolonged situation. He certainly does not want to absorb any casualties. And they believe that they have a better chance of the regime surviving if they go to war than if they capitulate to the U.S. demands. And that's why they're digging in.
President Trump has this great phrase, if you're running, no games. There's been all this media speculation in the last 24 hours. There may be something that the Israelis go and do a strike and use it as some sort of cover for the Americans to come in. Do you see anything right now? You do agree there is a focus on a diplomatic solution while President Trump builds a vast military apparatus essentially surrounding the Persians. Any truth to this rumor about any Israeli strike that we use as a cover and then the Americans come in later? Is that just media speculation?
I saw that in Politico. Look, you could get a leak for every position you want to take. It seems that everyone in the administration who has an opinion is leaking it, and then someone's running, whether it's Axios or Politico, and saying, "Oh, insiders say this, insiders say that." Trump is a master of unpredictability, and I'm not going to say that's what's going to happen. And look, I think that the Politico story that suggested that there are people in the administration who want the Israelis to strike first because then a retaliation could come against the U.S. assets, and that could drag America into it and provide greater justification, and the American people will be behind that. And I looked at that and I said, that's absurd. First of all, if that were to happen, everyone in America would say, as Steve Bannon probably would, there's Israel dragging us into another war. And no one wants that. The Israelis don't want that either. No one wants that. And the second thing is, in the 12-day war, Iran did not retaliate at all against any American assets. The only strikes against American assets were after the attacks on the nuclear facilities, that symbolic strike against assets in Qatar. So why would anyone think that this strategy would work? That, again, what was in Politico today, just so everyone knows what we're talking about, Politico had this report that someone in the administration says that the Americans want the Israelis to attack first because that will draw an attack on American assets in the Middle East, which will give justification for America to strike. I think it's ridiculous, Steve. Sorry. I know it was in Politico. It makes no sense to me strategically.
Rabbi, we're going to have you on. Hopefully, maybe we can't tomorrow. We'll have you on Monday. I want to talk about the meeting in Vienna and also your thoughts about what advice you give the president right now. Where do people get you? Your videos are amazing. Where do they go?
Thank you very much. You go to Israel 365 News YouTube channel, or I also have a personal YouTube channel that I started recently. That's my name, Pesach Wolicki, on YouTube, and you can also check me out at Rabbi PW on X. Thanks, Steve.
And you have a brain analysis of the Tucker Ambassador Huckabee interview. I recommend everybody go watch Rabbi Wolicki where he breaks that down. Short commercial.